We have a prior president by the name of George H.W. Bush, who has presently died in his home in Houston, Texas, at the age of 94 years old. This segment will be in honor of the Bush family.
Its people brutalized. 5 months ago, Saddam Hussein started this cruel war against Kuwait. Tonight, the battle has been joined.
It started as an air war, followed less than 6 weeks later by a ground war. Operation Desert Storm was short, brutally efficient, and successful.
Kuwait is liberated. Iraq's army is defeated. Our military objectives are met. Kuwait is once more in the hands of Kuwaitis in control of their own destiny. Tonight, the Kuwaiti flag once again flies above the capital of a free and sovereign nation, and the American flag flies above our embassy. 7 months ago, America and the world drew a line in the sand. We declared that the aggression against Kuwait would not stand. And tonight, America and the world have kept their word. This is not a time of euphoria, certainly not a time to gloat, but it is a time of pride. Pride in our troops, pride in the friends who stood with us in the crisis, pride in our nation, and the people whose strength and resolve made victory quick, decisive, and just.
A week later, before a joint session of Congress, President Bush declared victory.
As Commander-in-Chief, I can report to you our armed forces fought with honor and valor. And as President, I can report to the nation, aggression is defeated, the war is over.
Iraqi forces were pushed out of Kuwait, but in Iraq itself, Saddam Hussein was still in power and would remain so until he was toppled 12 years later by Bush's son.
I thought that Saddam Hussein would leave under his own power or under being knocked off by somebody else. But had I not thought that, would we then have gone to try to find him? No, we wouldn't have done it. And that was not our mission. And then for those who say, well, you should have gone in and killed Saddam. I'm Commander-in-Chief. I want his son to go, or his daughter, into Baghdad to find the most fortified, brutal dictator in history.
1991 began with Operation Desert Storm. It ended with one of the watershed events of the 20th century, the collapse of the Soviet Union. The Cold War had been the world's defining struggle for decades, fought by 9 American presidents. It ended with George Bush.
We gather tonight at a dramatic and deeply promising time in our history and in the history of man on earth. For the past 12 months, the world has known changes of almost biblical proportions. And even now, months after the failed coup that doomed a failed system, I'm not sure we've absorbed the full impact, the full import of what happened. But communism died this year. And even as president, with the most fascinating possible vantage point, there were times when I was so busy managing progress and helping to lead change that I didn't always show the joy that was in my heart. But the biggest thing that has happened in the world, in my life, in our lives, is this. By the grace of God, America won the Cold War.
I'm at this week, Joy, telling people that Geico's been offering savings for over 75 years. That's longer than a buffet.
Bush coming up.
Part of every president's job description has been to put up with being laughed at on Saturday Night Live. George Bush was no exception, but he did more than just tolerate Dana Carvey making fun of him. He showed he was able to have fun at his own expense.
Dana, George Bush here. I'm watching you do your impression of me, and I gotta say, it's nothing like me. Bears no resemblance. It's bad. It's bad.
Well, I'm sorry, Mr. President. I think it's a fair impression.
Don't see it.
You know?
It's totally exaggerated.
You think
Not
so?
me, those crazy hand gestures. The pointing thing, I don't do them. And also, nah, ga, da, never said it. In all my years of government service, I never once said nah, ga, da.
President Bush was so taken by Dana Carvey's act that he even invited him to the White House to cheer everyone up after Mr. Bush lost the election in 1992.
The way to do the president is to start out with Mr. Rogers. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Then you add a little John Wayne. Here we go. Let's go over the rich. You put them together. You got George Herbert Walker Bush.
Don't dare move my hands. What I want to do. No, but I am very grateful to Dana and to Paula for being here. And Dana's given me a lot of laughs. He said to me on the phone, "You sure you really want me to come there?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I hope I've never crossed the line." And I knew exactly what he meant. And as far as I'm concerned, he never has. And the fact that we can laugh at each other is a very fundamental thing. I'm not sure on November 4th that the invitation would have gone out and had the same enthusiasm.
George Bush did not expect to lose to Bill Clinton in 1992. He presided over the end of the Cold War, enjoyed sky-high popularity after the Gulf War. But a weak economy and an electorate ready for change did him in, and he didn't like it one bit. In an interview several years later, he read a letter he'd written the day after the election.
November 4th, the election's over, it's come and gone. It's hard to describe the emotions of something like this, but it's hurt, and I guess it's the pride too. On a competitive basis, I don't like to see the pollsters right at the end. I don't like to see the pundits right. I don't like to see all those who have written me off right. I was absolutely convinced we would prove them wrong, but I was wrong, and they were right, and that hurts a lot. I gave it my all, gave it my best, and got whipped, and went home. And boy, have we been happy.
With Barbara at his side, George Bush had one of the longest post-presidencies in American history. He saw his eldest son run for president.
And I want to thank my dad, the most decent man I have ever known. Dad, I am proud to be your son.
And win 2 terms. He stayed active, golfing, fishing, boating, even jumping out of airplanes to celebrate his 80th, 85th, and 90th birthdays. And George Bush overcame his political differences with Bill Clinton, joining forces to help victims of the disastrous 2004 tsunami in Asia.
The nice thing about it, it sends a signal around the world that you can be political opponents and still work together for something more important than your own political future.
Clinton was practically a member of the family.
Everyone is talking about the odd couple. George and Bill. Or as I now call him, son.
The presidency is, among other things, a small club. And in 2009, a new member was welcomed, President-elect Barack Obama. Later that year, President Obama paid tribute to George Bush on the 20th anniversary of his Points of Light volunteerism initiative and for his lifetime of service.
George Bush isn't just a president who promoted the ethic of service long before it was fashionable. He's a citizen whose life has embodied that ethic. From his daring service as a Navy pilot during World War II, enlisting the day he turned 18, to his time in Congress, at the CIA, and as UN ambassador, vice president, and president, he easily could have chosen a life of comfort and privilege. And instead, time and again, when offered a chance to serve, he seized it. It was second nature to him, the continuation of a proud family tradition that he and Mrs. Bush clearly passed on to their children and grandchildren, and one which he's carried on throughout his quote-unquote retirement. How's that working out, Ms. Bush?
Barbara Bush in on the joke in 2009. We'll hear from her when we continue in just a moment.
Oh, that's our new neighbor.
Inseparable throughout their remarkable life together. Speaking to NBC in 1999, Bush read a letter he had written to his wife 5 years earlier on their 49th anniversary.
January 6, 1994, for Barbara Pierce from GHWB. Will you marry me? Whoops, I forgot. You did that 49 years ago today. I was very happy on that day in 1945, but I'm even happier today. I have climbed the highest mountain in the world, but even that cannot hold a candle to being Barbara's husband. Mom used to tell me, now George, don't walk ahead. Little did she know.
No, don't do that. Little did you know what? I was only trying to keep up.
And another letter about a first kiss.
I kissed Barbara, and I'm glad of it. I don't believe she will ever regret it or resent it. And I certainly am not ashamed of it. I've never kissed another girl.
When we tell our children what I tell them, I never knew I was the first girl you ever kissed. But when I told them that you were the first person I ever kissed.
No, I was the second, darling. Haven Abbott.
Oh, he was not.
He was in there.
No, he knows. You know, Haven, that's not true. But having said that, they all... No,
Haven's
you may
doing.
not. Yes, I think he is. She has children, too. But anyway, they could sort of look like, yuck, carry on. But that's the truth.
You both married the first person you ever kissed?
Strange, I admit.
Still staying with your story?
Yes, I am.
Barbara Pierce Bush died on April 17, 2018. As always, George Bush was at her side. And when mourners came to pay their respects, he returned the favor, greeting them from his wheelchair, thanking them as they filed past her casket. Surrounded by family, he attended her funeral, holding up and staying strong despite his failing health. George and Barbara Bush were together for 73 years, the longest marriage in American presidential history. She was indispensable to her husband's success.
I've always felt I was the world's luckiest woman. Nobody ever had a greater, more precious family. Nobody ever had a better husband. I think George Bush and I are as good friends, as close as any two people I know. You know, we were married at 19 and 20, and we really sort of see the world through the same eyes.
She was the mother that went to the Little League games, raised the kids, bawled them out.
I chose to bring up my children. I mean, I had that choice, and I know it was a luxury.
Both George and Barbara Bush campaigned hard during the week.
I was gone a lot. She was the one that comforted our daughter when she was dying. She was the one that's kind of been there.
After she died, it was a terrible time in our life. I really sort of fell apart. Sort of hard for me to talk about. But he just put his arms around me and did not let me step away. And I loved him even more after that. You know that I'm wired for sound, so
Don't do
be careful. I've shared George all of my married life with lots of people. When George Bush is in the room, people knock me down to get to him. And I understand that. But I must say it is not ego building. But George has shared, so I don't feel left out. I don't feel like, oh, you've lived your husband's life. I'm glad he looks young, and I wish to heck I did too.
Oh, Bar, here, wedge in here.
I really love him, and he's made my life so happy, and he's shared with me, and I don't feel I'm, quote, just a political wife.
For soon she'll be the First Lady of all the United States.
When you're the president's wife, you don't have to make any decisions. I mean, look at me. I don't threaten anyone. Got nice white hair and a little fat face, and I like people, and it's easy. I don't agree with him on everything, and he and I know what those things are. I want you to care what he thinks. He's the president. I'm not. I haven't been elected to public office. I'm not courageous enough to do that. I want to welcome you all to the White House.
And I might say with some little husbandly pride, the Silver Fox is doing one heck of a job for education.
For Barbara Bush, I campaign my way. And since I'm so old and so mean, so tough, nobody dares tell me not to. I, too, agree that character and integrity are very important.
I want to thank my entire family with a special emphasis on a woman named Barbara.
The love of my father's life has been Barbara Bush.
She was a great First Lady, and she earned and won the respect of a lot of American people because they saw her what she is, down to earth, loving mother, caring individual, trying her hardest to do something about literacy, and setting an example with no bull about it. I've built my life around the world's greatest man and the world's greatest children. At the end of your life, you will never regret not having passed one more test, winning one more verdict, or not closing one more deal. You will regret time not spent with a husband, a child, a friend, or a parent. You've got two choices in life. You can like what you do, or you can dislike what you do. I've chosen to like what I do, and I think I'm the luckiest woman in the world.
Whenever Miss Barbara Bush died earlier this year, in the year of the Golden Jubilee, I was motivated by her death to the degree that I actually mourned to some degree of a politician who had passed, a politician's wife, because of what she stood for in her own legacy. Today is another day of sovereign silence in the passing of her husband. May God have mercy on the Bush family in their time of sorrow, in their time of grief. And may we learn to look over their mistakes that they have endlessly made, especially the mistakes that was concurrent with the founder of the Windmill Ministries missions towards me, myself, and I, who had never threatened any of the Bush family or the Bush family members. May we remember this moment, and may we pray for those that need comforting.
Gifted writer of letters. They often revealed a tender, emotional side that he never really shared publicly before he left office. We want to leave you with two of those letters. The first, Bush wrote to his mother several years after he and Barbara lost their daughter Robin to leukemia in 1953. Robin was a beautiful child, just 3 years old when she died. The subject was still so sensitive decades later that Bush could not read the letter himself. So he had Barbara read it for him.
There is about our house a need, the running, pulsating restlessness of the four boys as they struggle to learn and grow. The world embraces them. All this wonder needs a counterpart. We need some starched, crisp frocks to go with our torn-kneed blue jeans and helmets. We need some soft, blonde hair to offset those crew cuts. We need a dollhouse to stand firm against our forts and rackets and 1,000 baseball cards. We need a cutout star to play alone while the others battle to see who's family champ. We even need someone who could sing the descant to Alouette, while outside they scramble to catch the elusive ball aimed ever roofward, but usually thudding against the screens. We need a legitimate Christmas angel, one who doesn't have cuffs beneath the dress. We need someone who's afraid of frogs. We need someone to cry when I get mad, not argue. We need a little one who can kiss without leaving egg or jam or gum. We need a girl. Stop that. No good at that. We got a girl.
Got a good one?
Got a girl.
The reference is to daughter Dorothy, the Bush's youngest child, born in 1959, not long after that letter was written. In 1998, George Bush wrote a letter to all his children. He was 74 then, reflecting on the twilight years of a full life.
Dear kids, this letter is about aging. Talk about my getting older, and I love my boat. I worry a little bit about falling off the bow. I worry about fishing on those rocks out there, for concerned that I might lose my balance. This summer, one or two of you, I'm sure in an effort to be helpful, said, get a hearing aid or try listening. I heard you. I also heard a family member, I won't say of which generation, go, the old fogey is deaf. But I clearly heard what had gone on before, and I heard that old fogey thing too. Come to think back of it, I'm not sure the word was fogey. Not sure. Not sure at all. Anyway, it goes on. Last year there was only a tiny sense of time left, of sand running through the glass. This year, I must confess, I am more aware of that. No fear, no apprehension, just a feeling like, let's go. There's so much to do, and there might not be a lot of time left. And except for an ache here, a pain there, I feel like the proverbial spring cold. There is so much left to do. If I shed tears easier now, try not to laugh at me. Besides, it's okay to cry if you're a man. A happy man, me, or a man faced with sadness or hurt, not me. Remember the old song, I'll be there ready when you are. For there's so much excitement ahead, so many grandkids to watch grow. If you need me, I'm here. Devotedly, Dad.
George Bush lived for many years after writing that letter. He saw his children grow up and grow old. He welcomed the arrival of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. When he was 93, he saw his wife go before him. He also saw the party and the country he had served for so long change in ways that he could not have imagined and did not welcome. George Herbert Walker Bush was the last of the greatest generation to serve as president, and he embodied the best of that generation: decency, honor, integrity, aspiring to a patriotism that transcended party and ideology. In that, he remains an inspiration to so many. I'm Lester Holt. Thank you for being with us.
And I'm sure in many, many ways, the words that was just spoken is very, very true. But at the same time, we must not forget that on the opposite side of the perspective, George Herbert Walker Bush caused a great deal of remorse and a great deal of hardship in a great deal of people's lives. Mr. Bush come in off of the coattail of the Ronald Reagan era. The only reason why that the Ronald Reagan era was as successful as what it wasn't on the count of Ronald Reagan being shot by Hinckley and about a week later returning back to the White House, either in 83 or 84. But it was the fact that the Holy Spirit was working with that administration towards planting the seeds of ending the communism rule over in Russia, the old USSR, to the point of the falling of the Berlin Wall. Because of that success going through the Cold War era, made this man predominant towards becoming the next elected president, that stumbled in his cliche by repeating to the American people, "Read my lips, not my hips, no new taxes." This was the beginning era of the ending of an old era, but the beginning development stages of a new era in regard to putting us where we are today. The vacuum that was created by eliminating Saddam Hussein to this day are still being felt, the magnitude over in the Middle East, that has created basically an environment of more hostility and more radicalism. Though one town, one area may have been liberated at the expense of creating more terrorism and more left-wing extremists over in the Middle East pertaining to the old Persian Empire. In other words, it was an unforeseen mistake by taking out one of the most ruthless dictators at that time, which was Saddam Hussein, because even though Saddam Hussein was a ruthless dictator, he himself kept some sort of law and order with a group of people that was rootless in and of themselves. And it's really sad because of the exchanges that went on during that time. The founder of the Windmill Ministry tried so desperately to intervene in that mistake. And the thank you that I got naturally was being stopped in Wheeling, West Virginia by Homeland Security that was working directly through the Homeland Field Office in Nashville, Tennessee. And basically placed false charges upon my life in regard of me trying to attempt to take out George Walter Bush's life in the form of being an assassin. To this day, that mark, that lie, that stain is still upon to my life. Between that stain in 1991 in Wheeling, West Virginia, where I had to go to Butner, North Carolina, in one of my first major psychological evaluations, between that mark and the mark that my own people have left in my life here in the little town of Martin, Tennessee, in northwest Tennessee, between that mark and the mark up in Grand Rivers, Kentucky, around the Benton, Mayfield, Paducah, Kentucky area, and the mark that was placed upon my life in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, as well as the downtown Atlanta region area, has been marks that have been overwhelming to the pre-existence as well as the development of the Windmill Ministries missions in trying to bring forth a message that God had given unto me to give to the people, which was a message of the first seal in the book of Revelations being opened, and that Satan, the Antichrist spirit, had become witty enough and powerful enough that it re-engineered or redeveloped a human form in a body over in the Middle East that is now, to this day, still at large, though it masterminded the destruction of so many lives during 9/11. May God have mercy on the Bush family and the administrations that was either before, during, or even after, towards trying to formulate a world conspiracy of thinking that it actually had the power, that it actually had the undermining ability to destroy, eliminate, and eradicate the real supernatural, holy, righteous God by the name of Yahweh and his son Yeshua. To think that this administration put us where we are today in peril. Towards now, the divorce rate in America has exceeded anything that we would ever even dream of. Crime on the streets, drugs on the streets, all kinds of erratical behavior that has been the very opposite of what our forefathers engineered and designed for this country to be. In addition to us being $21+ trillion in debt, we personally would like to preserve the right of sharing our feelings about this, but we know, according to even one of our other prior presidents is by the name of Mr. Ford, that going into Iraq, Baghdad, was one of the worst mistakes that the American government has ever tried to topple upon to its own accord. We know now, because of looking at the past, that it would have been much simpler and much easier if the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, would have come out in a predominant form towards after the development of the biblical Bible prophecy towards distributing the truth to not only the American people, but distributing the truth to the world of biblical Bible prophecy. Once more, may God have mercy on Mr. Bush and the Bush family in the golden jubilee of walking off into eternity. It is not for the founder of the windmill ministry to judge, to condemn, or to trample over people's graves in such of a moving, touching, heartbreaking moment as this. But at the same time, we feel obligated. We feel convicted through our convictions of expressing some of our feelings towards the truth of this type of inappropriate behavior that is not and was not supposed to have happened here in the land of the free. Anytime a government intervenes in biblical Bible prophecy, it creates great malice, either in today's society in the 21st century, or going back into King Herod during the reign of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, or during the time that the Egyptians tried to stop another prophecy of occurring in Moses' era, or in other cultures, in other generations. We can now look back and see where whenever a institution or a government tries to alter the truth about biblical Bible prophecy, usually 99.9% of the time resorts in great agony and despair for not only the guilty, but also the innocent. Coming from the Windmill Ministries missions, from our heart to theirs, they have our deepest empathy and sympathy in the occurrences that has happened with George H. Walter Bush's life of 94 years old of his passing. Father, eternal God, we are all here for a brief time to do only that in which what you have called us into this great arena of doing. And I know that one job does not exceed the value or the importance of another, pertaining to your clergymen of being ministers to and from your great kingdom that you have brought into the existence of our lives. We just pray that you will comfort the family of this man's legacy in the Golden Jubilee, that you will comfort the needs and the heartfelt moments towards being a comforter in this great inspiring moment of the Bush family. In Jesus' holy name, we ask that you continue to be with them, and may God have mercy upon to the family, and may God bless the USA in its endeavors towards where it is and where it needs to go from this moment on in the future. In Jesus' name, in your holy, holy, holiest of holy Son's name. And amen. And amen.
It is 1 o'clock in the East. We continue our coverage of the death of former President George Herbert Walker Bush, America's 41st Commander-in-Chief. He has died at the age of 94. That word came to us now just over an hour ago. The word being passed from a statement from his son, the 43rd President George W. Bush. We're joined now by Hallie Jackson and John Meacham, biographer of George H.W. Bush. Hallie Jackson, our correspondent who's traveling with President Trump in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Hallie, let me just start with you, because we have heard from the current... I'm sorry, that is my mistake. We will be hearing from her in a minute, but we are going to actually pause here just for a few seconds, because we're going to be joined by our network affiliates. Pick up the network coverage as we continue our coverage. The NBC News stations will be joining us in just a moment.
This is an NBC News special report.
Steve Kornacki here in New York for NBC News, again with the breaking news this overnight. Former President George Herbert Walker Bush has passed away at the age of 94. That word coming to us just over an hour ago, a statement released by his son, the 43rd President George W. Bush. The former president, he had governed this country from 1989 to 1993, a time of momentous change, not just in this country, but in this world. A president who oversaw the prosecution of the Gulf War in 1991, the fall of Soviet communism, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the reunification of Germany, major global events that played out under the watch of George H.W. Bush, a one-term president whose legacy in the last 25 years and the generation since his presidency has in many ways been enhanced in a way that few one-term presidents before him we have seen. Hallie Jackson, who's covering the current president, Donald Trump, on his trip to the G20 summit in Buenos Aires. She joins us live from there. And Hallie, we have heard from President Trump in the last few minutes.
We have, in a statement, Steve, from both President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump as they are here in Argentina for that summit of world leaders responding to the death now of former President George H.W. Bush. I'm going to read you pieces of this. President Trump saying that Melania and I join with the grieving nation to mourn the loss of former President George H.W. Bush, who passed away last night. Through his essential authenticity, disarming wit, and unwavering commitment to faith, family, and country, President Bush inspired generations of fellow Americans to public service, to be, in his words, 1,000 points of light, illuminating the greatness, hope, and opportunity of America to the world. President Trump goes on to talk about some of the defining moments of George H.W. Bush's life and legacy, talking about how he always found a way to set the bar higher. President Trump continues with sound judgment, common sense, and unflappable leadership. President Bush guided our nation and the world to a peaceful and victorious conclusion of the Cold War. And as president, he set the stage for the decades of prosperity that have followed. President Trump adding that through all he accomplished, he remained humble, following the quiet call to service that gave him a clear sense of direction. President Trump and the First Lady saying, along with his full life of service to this country, we will remember President Bush for his devotion to his family, especially the love of his life, Barbara. His example lives on and will continue to stir future Americans to pursue a greater cause. Our hearts ache with his loss, and we, with the American people, send our prayers to the entire Bush family as we honor the life and legacy of 41. That, Steve, again, the response from President Trump as he is here at the G20 summit in Argentina. It is roughly 3 o'clock local time, a little bit earlier, of course, where you are on the East Coast and back home in Washington. In the coming days, we expect that there will, of course, be services in D.C. for the former president, starting with George H.W. Bush lying in state at the Capitol and then a service at the National Cathedral. We don't have exact timing on that at this point, but I expect that will come shortly. We are hearing, too, from members of Congress paying their respects to the former president, who is such a key political figure to a lot of folks inside the Republican establishment. World leaders perhaps reacting as they start to wake up here at the G20 this morning. Couple of notes, Steve, on the relationship between President Trump and the former president. It was fraught at times. It was interesting that the 1,000 points of light phrase is being included here. So important to former President Bush, but something that President Trump jabbed at when he was out on the campaign trail talking about that. That put him under scrutiny from former Bush aides and allies, for example, who weren't quite sure why President Trump was going after former President George H.W. Bush there. Former First Lady Barbara Bush, at her funeral, Melania Trump attended on behalf of the Trump family. President Trump said he would not attend, according to the White House, out of respect for the family, Steve. We are watching for more reaction, and I'll bring it to you as soon as we get it.
Hallie Jackson in Buenos Aires with the president. Hallie, thank you for that. Bring in now John Meacham, biographer of George H.W. Bush. John, the moment in his presidency that will probably define it more than any other was the decision to go to war with Saddam Hussein and Iraq in 1991 when Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait. At that moment, the decision to go to war was a very controversial one. The point of reference was Vietnam. He chose to go.
He chose to go because he believed, as he put it, this will not stand, this aggression against Kuwait. He decided from the 2nd of August, 1990, through about the 5th of August, that it was important in a post-Cold War era to establish, at least attempt to establish, a rule of law among nations. He saw Kuwait as a victim. He saw Saddam Hussein as an aggressor. He and James Baker successfully marshaled the world to project force around the world in order to try to attempt, and as President Bush put it in a speech to Congress on September 11th, 1990, that the law of nations should trump the law of the jungle.
All right, John Meacham, thank you for joining us.
And I want to weigh in one more time before I end this little segment. The whole primary purpose, to my understanding, was to try to bring stability to that group of people, stability to that region. And instead of bringing stability, it all backfired and become one of the most ruthless, engulfed terrorism regions that we have ever known or seen since then. In other words, the very works that he tried to do, which probably had the best intentions at heart, wound up backfiring. And now, not only did it cost that region, but it costed the American people in numbers and in lives. Probably beyond anything imaginable that anybody could have ever thought of trying to defeat the jungle by the laws of the civilized world. as we have said before and we will say again, may God have mercy upon to the Bush family and the Bush administration of the mistakes as well as the accomplishments that was made during his presidency. Good luck to all of us. And shalom in this golden jubilee. He was a good soldier. The marks that he left during World War II was remarkable. He had a great deal of love for his country and his fellow man.